ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation and the Belgium Embassy in Berlin, I warmly welcome you to this conversation with the Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo. We are truly delighted to have you all here and that you chose us over a nice drink outside in a beer garden. My name is Jana Pulierin. I'm a senior policy fellow with the European Council on Foreign Relations, a pan-European think tank. I'm heading the Berlin office and I'm your moderator today. Just allow me to quickly run you through today's agenda. We'll have first two introductory remarks. First by Professor Karl-Heinz Paquet, who is the chairman of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, followed by Ambassador Gerd Leo Meule. And then we'll have, of course, the Prime Minister speaking, giving his keynote speech. He will address the consequence of the war in Ukraine for Europe. He will talk about Europe's future and what we need to do to adapt in order to strive. After the keynote, you will have the opportunity to engage in a conversation with the Prime Minister and myself. And I think we are both very much looking forward to this. But for now, I leave the floor to Professor Paquet.
Dear Prime Minister De Croo, dear Ambassador Meule, dear members of Parliament, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you all on this very special and sunny day. Today we are celebrating the birth of the political vision of a united Europe, of a united European continent. Personally, Europe Day has always been a day of joy for me, and I think for many others of us. A day to celebrate the achievements of our unique union, a day to reassert our European values, a day to look ahead of what the future has in store for our continent. Today, Europe Day still represents all that, but it also has an additional meaning for us. Especially you young people, and I see quite a few young people in this room, in the audience, you grew up in a place and at a time with more peace, more freedom, and more prosperity than at any other time in human history. Today, this peace is threatened by a man in the Kremlin who has launched a war of aggression against another sovereign nation, Ukraine. With this barbaric war, Putin and his regime are trying to prevent Ukraine from embracing European values, which Putin and his regime fear so much. With brute force, they want to intimidate others to follow in Ukraine's footsteps and turn westwards. With this attack, they have hoped to catch the EU off guard and sow the seeds of division in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, I think today it is already obvious how wrong Putin was. The Russian president has grossly underestimated the power of our European values. He has grossly underestimated the heroic determination of the Ukrainian people to fight for their freedom and to fight for their right to self-determination. He has grossly underestimated the appeal of the European Union that an ever-growing number of countries so dearly want to join, and he grossly underestimated our solidarity and our unity and our resilience. The EU's response to Russia's aggression was unprecedented, both in scope and in speed. Within days, decades worth of taboos were overcome within member states as well as on the EU level. The message that the EU has sent is clear. Putin has not divided us. On the contrary, Europe stands united by Ukraine's side. We know that Ukraine's fight is our fight as well. We know that Putin is attacking not only Ukraine, but also our values and our European way of life. This is why we need to do our utmost to support Ukraine in this fight. Well, could the EU and its members do even more in this current crisis? Arguably so, and the lessons we will draw from this crisis will make some hard choices necessary. The EU has now more than ever the responsibility to strengthen its institutions and to demonstrate that liberal democracies are best equipped to tackle and to answer the challenges of our time. Prime Minister De Croo will share his ideas of how we can achieve this later in his speech on defense policy, on energy policy and EU enlargement and other matters. In all this, however, one thing remains clear. We can and we should trust in the strength of the European idea and our European values. When we wave our European flag today on Europe Day in blue and yellow, we do it in this spirit. We wave it in solidarity with the heroic people of Ukraine. We wave it for the future of an ever stronger and more resilient union, and we wave it for democracy and freedom to prevail over autocracy and totalitarianism. This is why today, Europe Day, is not just a day of joy, it is a day of renewed European self-confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now looking forward to the welcome remarks by Ambassador Meule, and I am eager to draw inspiration from the forthcoming speech of Prime Minister De Croo and the discussion thereafter. I wish you all a wonderful late afternoon in this beautiful place, which also stands for European values of tolerance, integration and migration. And looking forward to tonight. Thank you very much for your attention, and the floor is yours, Ambassador Meule. Thank you very much.
Dank u schön, Herr Paquet. Lieber Herr Ministerpräsident De Croo, liebe Kollegen und Freunde der belgischen Botschaft in Berlin, I wish you a warm welcome in the Französischer Dom. This dome was built after the Huguenots, who had fled religious persecution in France, found refuge here in Berlin. And at the embassy, we saw this place a fitting venue for a dialogue on the values and principles that constitute the core of our European societies. Values and principles that have been under pressure for some time now, globally and unfortunately also within the EU. But right now, they are under attack. President Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine is not only a war about territory, it is also a war against those values and principles. against the core of what Europe stands for, against our soul, if I may say so, in this setting. It is a war against a rules-based international order, against a multilateralism which we, Germans and Belgians alike, have been actively promoting since the Second World War. So the crisis we are facing today is a fundamental one, a potentially game-changing one. One in which we cannot let Putin win, dictate matters of peace and security on the European continent and beyond, and undermine our core values and principles. It is also a crisis that will definitely change us and oblige us to have a look at ourselves. But the crisis we are facing today is also, I'm sorry to say, a crisis amongst other crises and challenges. I am thinking of climate change and how we need to be carbon neutral in just 28 years. I'm still thinking of the pandemic. And then there are the challenges and developments beyond the borders of our continent that impact on us all. I guess one could say we are in a perfect storm. A storm we need to navigate decisively, acting quickly, but always with a clear bearing. A storm also we need to navigate together as a team. No government alone can do this. Only by joining forces between governments and citizens do we stand a fighting chance. So we need to talk. And that is exactly what the Prime Minister of Belgium, Mr. Alexander De Croo, is here to do. Mr. De Croo has been Prime Minister of Belgium since October 1st, 2020. Before that, he held positions of, amongst others, Minister of Finance, Minister of Development Cooperation, of Digitalization. He also was President of the Flemish Liberal Party. He only got into politics in 2009, so I guess I can say that it went pretty hard for Mr. De Croo. Before 2009, he worked as a business consultant. His first job was in Germany, in Düsseldorf. And then, putting his money where his mouth is, Mr. De Croo created his own company, his own business, and this business is still in business today. Mr. De Croo was born in the 70s. He declares himself a proud member of the 99 Luftballons generation. And he grew up in Brakel. Well, Brakel is the heartland of de Ronde van Vlaanderen, the Tour of Flanders, so I really don't need to tell you what his favorite sports hobby is. Prime Minister De Croo has a very keen interest in all things European and international. He is extremely well connected and informed. He is a gifted speaker and debater. So, dear colleagues, dear friends, I am totally, absolutely sure that we are in for a great evening here in the Französische Dom and afterwards in the Belgian embassy, in the Jägerstrasse, where there are some Belgian beers that are awaiting you. Mr. De Croo, Mr. Prime Minister, I happily cede the floor to you.
Meine Damen und Herren, liebe Freunde, lassen Sie mich zunächst der Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung dafür danken, dass sie mir am Europatag hier an diesem besonderen Ort, dem französischen Dom, das Wort erteilt hat. Eine französische Kathedrale im Herzen der deutschen Hauptstadt, erbaut für Protestanten auf der Flucht vor religiöser Verfolgung. Nur wenige Schritte vom Brandenburger Tor, dem Symbol der deutschen Einheit. It is hard to imagine a more fitting place to reflect on the values that cement our European project and that unite our European family. Solidarity with people in need, leaving no one behind, while vigorously defending our freedoms. These European values have never been more under attack than today. With his war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is brutally murdering Ukrainians, victims of his deranged imperialistic fantasies. He denies them to be free people, to make free choices, to live a free life. And I choose my words very carefully. We are talking about the most serious war crimes in Europe of the past 70 years. But Putin is not only aggressing against Ukraine, he's also pounding Europe with disinformation campaigns, fake news and hackings to destabilize our democracies and turning our people against each other. By weaponizing energy to attack purchasing power and to undermine our prosperity. By abusing refugees to test our sense of solidarity. Let's be clear. We are up against a regime that is morally completely bankrupt. A regime bent on subjugating people. A regime intent on undermining trust between Europeans. This war in Ukraine has pushed us Europeans on a historic crossroad. The choice in front of us is a simple one. Either we stick to old recipes and old structures and Europe will unravel, or we renew Europe, become stronger and more resilient as a bloc, still open to the world, but no longer in a naive way. By putting our interests and our citizens first, protecting people and safeguarding our European way of life. That is our leitmotiv. It always has been and it always will be. We can and we shall do this with European strength and leadership. And that is why we need Germany. Because when Germany spreads its wings, Europe can fly. Not just because of the size and the position of Germany, but more so because of your deep understanding of West and East. Because of the strong democracy and the solid rule of law that you have built after 1945. That was my message to President Steinmeier this afternoon, and it will be my message to Chancellor Scholz tomorrow. Germany has learned the hard way that simply handing over power to the majority leads to tyranny. That freedom is also about safeguarding fundamental rights of minorities. That freedom is not just doing whatever you want whenever you want. Not for leaders, not for citizens. This was one of the big lessons of COVID. Like Rüdiger Zawrinski wrote in his book Einzelsein, freedom and togetherness are both defining to human condition. Freedom is also belonging to a free society of others. It is this freedom and this free society that Vladimir Putin is waging war against. He first destroyed it in Russia. Now he is destroying it in Ukraine, and if we do nothing and we do not push back, he will also destroy it in Europe as well. Because Putin hates the idea of people governing themselves. These are two systems colliding. Autocracy against democracy. Autocracy based on a culture of oppression and violence, while democracy is a culture of humanity, consensus, and respect for fundamental rights. It is a culture of debt against the culture of life. For in autocracies, the price of human life is indeed very low. So this is our political mission on this Europe Day, to build a stronger, more resilient European democracy. To anchor our democracy in strong and stable institutions, to make these institutions accessible to all, to engage all citizens in deciding, and to secure our freedom and prosperity for the years and decades to come. And if this sounds wholly unoriginal as an idea to you, you are absolutely right. It is the essence of democracy. The work is never done. There is no end of history. The only thing we have are crossroads that urge us to keep moving. And to keep moving, I see three priorities: defense, energy, and enlargement. Making Europe a more solid military bloc is the first priority. And that is not by competing with NATO or by walking away from it, but by bolstering it as a strong European pillar. And to be frank, we are lucky today that President Biden is the captain of our transatlantic ship. But we should not be naive. No more than 5 years ago, the American president was openly questioning our collective defense, the cornerstone of the Atlantic Alliance. Today, Donald Trump might be gone, but Trumpism is far from gone. America First is still very much alive in US politics. And we can simply not make ourselves dependent on who will be the next occupant of the White House. And I am saying this as a strong and staunch supporter of transatlantic cooperation. But we Europeans, we must take our destiny in our own hand. And we can do this. Since the Schuman Declaration, which is today exactly 72 years ago, we have achieved so much. We have built a single market, a single currency, a customs union, and even more important, a community of values. And now Europe must become a military-industrial bloc as well. And to do that, we need 3 steps. First of all, less fragmentation. I think we all know the figures. The US has 4 types of warships. We in Europe, we have 30. And it's the same for tanks and the same for aircraft. And this fragmentation weakens our defense budgets. So we have to turn this around. Second step, we must build a stronger European defense industry, able to compete with global players. If we increase our defense budgets and our investments in military technology, let it be European technology, developed in Europe, built in Europe, and with a European return on investment. Third step, our society as a whole should benefit directly from military investment, strengthening our cyber capacity for our businesses, enhancing military intelligence in the fight against terrorism, providing education to our young people. So the building blocks are there, and we can use military partnerships that already exist and scale them up, like Belgium and the Netherlands, whose air forces work closely together and whose navies are fully integrated by linking a military logic with an economic logic. And of course, we must make all these efforts in close consultation with our American friends. But it is up to us, to Europe, so NATO can finally stand on 2 full legs: a strong American leg and an equally advanced European one. By stepping up our efforts, we will better protect our fragile European values, because those values are fragile indeed. Anti-democrats like Vladimir Putin use the open and tolerant nature of our democracy to break it, holding mock elections at home while hacking real elections abroad. It is like the Dutch poet Lucebert wrote, "Everything of value is defenseless. Alles wertvolle is weerloos." Our democracy is one of the most valuable assets, and it is our job to rally to her defense. Ladies and gentlemen, alongside defense, Energy is a second domain in which Europe must act. To make us energy independent from the rest of the world, to drive prices down, to drive emissions down. For let us be honest, Europe has cuddled up to Russia for cheap Russian oil and gas for too long. I also strongly believed in wandel durch handel, in change through trade, that we could have a win-win situation. But we were wrong. When you dance with the devil changes you and not the other way around. It blinded us. It made us complacent. And if we do not act swiftly and decisively, it will cripple us. Here too, the building blocks are ready. We need to finalize our single energy market to the benefit of all Europeans. More interconnected, more focused on homegrown renewable energy. Instead of buying fossil fuels from autocrats, we should be buying and selling energy from each other. Trading hydropower from the north with solar power from the south and wind power from our seas. If we are not serious about this, we should put our money where our mouth is. If we want to be serious, put our money where our mouth is. And develop a new ambitious European plan. Financed on the European level, dedicated to European projects, large-scale energy investments with a clear focus. A focus on renewable energy, on transnational projects like interconnectors, and on the development of new cutting-edge, high-risk but promising technologies. And let's be clear, Europe should be a leader in this. Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium, we are showing the way forward in clean hydrogen. We should also work together in developing zero-waste nuclear. And you know what? Europe has proven it is possible to join forces. And we did that in developing the COVID vaccines. And I am convinced we will prove it again with energy. Confronting climate change, achieving carbon neutrality and lowering the energy prices as a union. Affordable energy for all Europeans. Ladies and gentlemen, energy is not the only hot topic on our plate. The war in Ukraine has made one elephant in the room unavoidable. The elephant of EU enlargement. And I have to say the term enlargement has become quite toxic. It's been used and abused by anti-Europeans. And I have to say it's also somewhat a misleading term. The flag doesn't necessarily cover the cargo. Because more than about enlarging our union, to me it really is about uniting Europe. Creating an economic union and a community of values with all the people on our continent who fiercely believe in freedom and in democracy. And if you look at it geopolitically, integrating Ukraine, Moldova and the Western Balkans is something we really must do. Nothing would be more dangerous for Europe to just sit still, to defend the status quo and to retreat between our own borders. Our European neighborhood would be turned into vassal states, either through military force by Russia or through an aggressive investment policy by other foreign powers. And we are actually seeing that today, for example, in the Balkans. People in our neighborhoods are looking at us. They're looking at Europe for change, for democracy, for a better life. Let us please not hand our neighbors on a platter to autocratic powers. It would be the very denial of our own values. So the question is, how can this European unification also be a unification of values, of democracy, the rule of law and civil liberties for all? And let's be frank, this is a hard nut to crack. In our current union, we are struggling with this issue as well. And success is not guaranteed, but it has been done before. Here in Germany, there would not have been a Wirtschaftswunder without a Demokratiewunder. And we need to apply the same logic to our neighborhood, being less of a supervisor and more of a companion on economic reform, on the rule of law, on institution building. And above all, we must make clear that those values are not just Northern European or Western European values. They are European values, full stop. That means equal rights for women and men, including sexual and reproductive rights and the right to safe abortion and accessible health care. Equal rights for LGBTI people so that they can be out and proud. Full freedom of speech for journalists, for religious people, for all citizens. The freedom to believe without the fear of being diminished. It is about the fight against all forms of discrimination. Now, some people will say, you know, many of these rights were only recently acquired. All the more reason to enshrine them into the heart of our European project. We fought too long and too hard to give up on these rights, or to allow member states to push back at them. For me, these values are part and parcel of our liberal democracy, of our European way of life, and they are non-negotiable. So how do we get there? In the case of Ukraine, this means linking reconstruction to reform. The country is experiencing its Stunde Null. We have to help reconstructing cities and streets, while at the same time building strong democratic institutions. Like Germany did after World War II. The challenge is not bureaucratic or legalistic. The challenge is a geostrategic one. It is a project of value integration. And it is the single biggest challenge of our European generation. And it's true, it will not be done overnight. It will take years of determination to achieve. Today, we need to anchor Ukraine solidly in Europe, just like Moldova or countries of the Western Balkans. We should allow them to come closer to our Union by enabling their citizens to benefit directly from democratic space and the single market, by having them participate in some of our institutions, by showing their citizens they are Europe as much as we are. Let us take this bold step for a European Union that takes responsibility for its whole neighborhood, actually for its whole continent. A truly inclusive Europe. And for some of them, the ultimate goal will be integration. And that will not happen overnight. But it is our job to create the right conditions for these countries to become part of a political unity of open and free democracies. This European unification will only be successful if it makes our societies more open, more tolerant, and more free. Without this mission, let's be clear, Europe means nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, my reading of the current situation is that it is time to let go of our European naivety. We have to do what Winston Churchill did in the summer of 1911. Change tack. The young Sir Winston was one of the leaders of a political group which called themselves the Economists. And he believed that entering into a naval race against Germany was unnecessary. Until Kaiser Wilhelm sent a German warship into the port of Agadir. The German decision struck Churchill as a bolt of lightning. It proved to him that the German Reich was not out for peace, it was out for war. And it made him change his mind overnight. When he was appointed Lord Admiral, he built up the Royal Navy that would be decisive in freeing the European continent. Ladies and gentlemen, we are past our Agadir moment. Our Agadir moment was when Putin annexed Crimea and occupied the Donbass back in 2014. That's when he started his war in Europe. And that's when we missed the chance to stop him. What we need in Europe today is a Churchillianische Wende. When faced with a decisive moment, we need to take decisive action. The generations who came before us did not build up Europe merely for us just to consume it. They left it with an implicit understanding that we would continue to build it. A Europe that inspires and that protects people. A Europe that shows leadership. We are not used to that. We are used to leading from behind. It is time now to right our backs and to stand up. Stand up for our fragile values of humanity and democracy. A few weeks ago, my Estonian colleague Kaja Kallas gave a speech here in Berlin. She is a dear friend of mine and she represents new leadership in Europe. When she talks about her experience of living under Soviet rule, her face always becomes a bit more serious and her tone hardens. I can tell you, it was not nice, is what she always says. 4 words that communicate a traumatic experience with autocracy. 4 words that also communicate determination. Never again. Kaja, Estonia and the Baltic states prove you do not have to be big to be a leader. It is the power of conviction that counts. And that is the beauty of our union. In our diversity, we find unity. Our differences of opinion do not end up in bloodshed. There is a consensus that makes all of us stronger. This is what makes us attractive. This is why countries or people are knocking on our door to get in. We do not bind peoples and countries to us through force, but through the power of our ideas. And that used to be different in Europe's past. But we have broken with our past. We have learned from our past. We must never allow anyone to take this away from us. And finally, let us not forget, this fight for freedom begins at home. In our societies, in our parliaments too, political forces lean towards Putin and his ideology of fear and hate. Racists and communists. We have come too far to let our freedoms be taken away by conservatives on the far left and the far right who jeopardize fundamental equality of every individual person. We have spent too much time on a social welfare state to let it be destroyed by communists. And we have built too many bridges to let them be blown up by nationalists with anti-European agendas that will make us poorer, not richer. We must not let a day pass without exposing them. But above all, we must deliver. Europe and all European countries must deliver on the promise that we will protect people, especially in these turbulent times, so that people feel safe and supported to spread their wings, to engage with each other, and to build a society where everyone is free and where we never give up on each other. We have to restore that European dream. The belief that our children and grandchildren will be better off than we are. That when everyone makes his or her contribution to our society, we will all progress. That progress is there not only for a small group, but for everyone without discrimination. That is what liberal democracy stands for. That is what Europe stands for. And that is what we will never stop fighting for. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for the positive vibes, for the forward-looking, fearless approach that you presented here. And we now have quite some time to dive deeper into some of the aspects of your speech and to bring up other aspects that have not been addressed so far. I will give you the opportunity to come in, so prepare yourself, brace yourself. There are microphones, but the Naumann Foundation, I think, was afraid that you would not come up with questions, no, but has asked a couple of young people in the streets of Germany about what they wanted to ask Mr. De Croo. And we listen to these young people first, and then I promise you that we start a conversation also in the room. So maybe we can see the first video clip to kick us off.
Hello and guten Tag, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Max and I'm a law student at the University of Leipzig. Well, first, as speaker of the scholarship holders of Friedrich Naumann Foundation, I ought to start with a huge thank you, considering the great opportunity asking you those following questions. I mean, it's definitely appropriate letting you know what kind of solemn honor it is for us and how much we appreciate the time you take therefore, despite or even just because of those murky days and these terrible conditions that currently are pressing on our souls. Even more, I was impressed of the unity and the powerful determination of the European Union in the past weeks. Maybe as a tiny but delightful spark of hope. But nevertheless, I ask myself, given Hungary's constant infringement of the rule of law, how can we, as liberals, live with an autocrat in the European House?
Maybe to expand the question a bit, is there the danger that we now sweep the rule of law question under the carpet, with Poland being very active, taking a lot of migrants in, being at the forefront of diplomatic efforts? So how is the state of rule of law, and is there a danger that we neglect it now?
Well, this is one of the nice things in Europe, is that we can admire certain countries for certain things they do, and we can still disagree on other things. I mean, this is how we work as Europeans. We can have a nuanced opinion on a number of things. And I say that because, of course, the efforts that especially Poland is doing, but also Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and so on, I mean, these are incredible efforts that they're doing in showing humanity, which is helping people in need. But the discussion on rule of law indeed is still there, and a crisis like this one actually shows why this is an important discussion. Because as a European Union, in times of crisis, it's important that we know what the rules are and that we all agree on the rules. And those rules, such as respect for the rule of law, let's be fair, they're not new. I mean, it's Article 2 in our treaty. I mean, it always has been there. It's not that some countries like ours or Germany have changed their minds. I mean, it's other countries that change their mind on the importance of the rule of law. Now, what is the good thing is that the European Commission is doing the right thing. It's using the conditionality of rule of law, and they are using it in, for example, in Hungary, in the disbursement of the European investment funds, and we know that they are in a discussion with Poland as well. So we have a stick behind the door, and that's good. Now, the only thing I hope is that in the end we solve this in a political way where we understand each other and where we have a discussion on why this is actually so important. But it comes back to the essence of democracy. I mean, democracy is not absolute power. It's not the power of majority. I mean, the main virtue of democracy is the protection of minorities. And another element of a well-functioning democracy is division of power. It's not because you win elections that you have full power. I mean, an independent judicial system, an essential element. So, over the past months, the European Court of Justice did some decisions which are helpful, which confirm the fact that rule of law really is at the core. But now, as political leaders, we also have to do our work, and we also have to find a solution to that. We cannot outsource solutions to the European Court of Justice.
Thank you very much. We have another clip prepared for you.
So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask questions. I'm a law student from Munich, and I'm particularly interested in security policy and foreign policy because I'm also training to be a reserve officer within the German Air Force. And I think we've all seen a pretty significant shift in terms of actually prioritizing questions of defense policy and security policy, especially here in Germany. And my question to you is whether or not you expect this to be a long-term shift and a long-term development, actually making questions of defense and security a real priority on European level, and whether or not you expect a real kickstart in projects like a European army or shared defense projects. Thank you so much.
And Alexander, maybe you could address the Swedish and Finnish aim to join NATO, and if that would kind of help our efforts or help also to divide the work share between NATO and EU better, or to make the two organizations more compatible.
Well, you know, for us Europeans, security is a collective thing. We do this together, and this is what enabled us to have peace on this continent for more than 70 years. That's because we decided that we were a bloc and that we would defend each other. And that is why the decisions that have been taken in Germany over the past weeks are so significant. And I know that spectators or people who comment, it's their job to comment. Obviously, they sometimes say, well, but is it enough? I would say, don't underestimate the shift that Germany has taken. The shift in investing in such a massive way in additional defense. The shift in deciding to deliver heavy weapons to Ukraine. These are not simple decisions in a country like Germany with the size it has and with the history which is already a long time past. But it's normal that these are not easy decisions. And as I said, the moment Germany spreads its wings, we all fly. And these decisions, they really are fundamental. And yes, it does take some time before everything percolates. I think that is quite normal. And it's exactly the same with the energy choices that we make. Yes, it does. Does it still work? Yes. Yes, it does take some time before those measures have an impact on the other side and have an impact in Russia. Now, on NATO membership or potential NATO membership for Finland and Sweden, obviously, if they want this, they're quite welcome. And this is how NATO has expanded. And there we have to be very clear. Every time that Russia says, oh, a new member of NATO is actually intimidating us, that's completely wrong. It shows the way Russia looks at their neighborhood. NATO is a defensive mechanism. We defend ourselves and we tell that we will defend each other. Now, the countries that joined NATO over the last 20 years, they joined us for a reason. They joined us for the reason that Kaja Kallas gave, which is it was not nice living under the intimidation of a big neighbor. And so they come to us because they feel more secure. When Russia says that that is intimidating, it shows that the reasoning of Russia is our neighbors should be open for intimidation. Which I understand that some countries at some point said, well, we don't want to be part of this game anymore. And if Finland and Sweden take the decision to do that, they're very welcome. But this is not an attack to Russia. It's just countries who say, we trust you. And we trust our security in being part of your club. Who can be against that?
We have one last question prepared before I then open it up. And please make yourself visible, raise your hand, wave, stand up, do whatever to catch my attention. I have somebody here already, but first the last spot, please.
Hi, my name is Konstantin. I'm a PhD candidate in political economy here at King's College in London. Over the last months, we have seen inflation rates rising to astonishingly higher levels that we haven't witnessed in decades. High inflation rates especially negatively affect low-income households and thus endanger social peace and give populist parties a potential to rise against. So my question to you is, how can we solve the issue of inflation and by doing so keep social peace? Thank you very much.
I think a very important question also for the German debate, but for everybody in Europe. So how do we solve inflation and how do we kind of keep control of rising energy prices and all this?
One of the things I said in my speech is that Europe should deliver. And we should deliver on protecting our population. And protecting our population against inflation, that's what people expect from us. Now, the inflation we have in Europe is a bit different than the inflation you have in the United States. The inflation you have in the United States is more driven by the monetary side, whereas here the inflation, it comes from supply problems. I mean, the prices are increasing because there are problems in supplying energy, or there is insecurity in energy markets, and that drives other things. So the solution is to intervene in the prices, to find ways that there is enough supply. If there is a shortage of supply, if you have more supply, prices should go down, but also to intervene when we see that markets are not functioning. I'm a liberal. I'm a big fan of free markets. Free markets are incredibly efficient in allocating resources. But when they don't function, it's not a religion for me. If it doesn't work and if it's not delivering to the population, you should intervene. And intervening in free markets, it's not like we never do that. I mean, if you have an economic crash and the stock market is spiraling down and destroying companies which are actually healthy, what do? We pull the plug of the stock market and we say, wait a few days. In energy markets, we should not be afraid to do exactly the same. If we see that prices are increasing in a way which is not explicable by supply shortage, we should intervene. Is it as Europeans to buy as a group against the ones who are selling as a group? Or is it by putting price caps and so on? There are things that we can do to intervene on that. I mean, failing on curbing the price increases would mean that we are failing on our population. If we say we need to protect our people, for me this is the #1 priority in the weeks to come.
Thank you, Alexander. I have already collected 3 voices from the audience, but just a thought before I give the floor to the gentleman over there first, then the gentleman over there, and then the lady over there. When I was listening to your speech, I was really impressed by the fearlessness. You did not mention once the risk of nuclear escalation, of a third world war, of, anything that we have heard constantly highlighted in the German debate in the past couple of weeks. Yesterday, our Chancellor gave a speech, addressed basically the nation, and shared with us his fear or his awareness of the risk, of the escalatory risk. And there was nothing of this in your speech. And I personally found that, just courageous and wonderful that you emphasized kind of how much we need to side with Ukraine. But maybe when we've collected all the questions, you could include this in your answer too, how you deal with, the escalatory risk and the fears. And now the gentleman over there, the gentleman over here, the lady over here, and I have already the next person on my list. The microphone is coming,
Johannes Ahlefeld, SPD Parliamentary Group Advisor. President Macron, in his address to the European Parliament today, was suggesting a new approach to European integration, kind of differentiated integration. I guess he may have spoken to you before he's launching the event, so it may not come completely unprepared for you. What is your reaction to that? Will you support that? And in that context, he was only referring to paving the way speedily to Ukrainian accession. And von der Leyen in the press conference afterwards was kind of adding Moldova and Georgia. But I was wondering how, what is Belgian approach to the Thessaloniki commitments? The European Commission had suggested a few years ago starting accession negotiations with some countries, and are they going to be left behind, or what's going to be the effect if you would support such a new approach?
Thank you very much. So we collect and then you address them all together. There was one question over here, the gentleman in the third row. Could you stand up so that people can identify you easily and give you the microphone? And it would be great if you could introduce yourself in the beginning so that the Prime Minister knows whom he's talking to.
I think the Prime Minister seems to remember me. I was German ambassador to Belgium between 2011 and 2015. And I had worked in European politics, so I had spent many, many years in Brussels and in Belgium. So I have one remark and one question. In Germany we have a lot of discussion. Who is going to visit Ukraine, Kiev first? The President, Steinmeier, Federal Chancellor, whoever. But, in fact, isn't it good that President von der Leyen and now President Michel have visited Ukraine first, even though Odessa is bombed while he's there? My question is already partly covered when you're talking about the European pillar of defense. Isn't there already a certain commitment to defend other member states? So even if Austria, which does not have a common border with Russia, or Sweden or Finland are attacked by anyone else, aren't we also obliged to defend them? What do you think?
Via Article 42.7 to be more precise. Thank you very much. I think a super interesting question also in light of EU enlargement. The lady over there.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Franziska Brandman. I'm the president of the Young Liberals here in Germany. First of all, I want to make a comment. I really appreciate that you wrote a book about feminism. I think that liberals should be feminists. And so, first of all, I think that's amazing. But also, I want to make a comment on security and defense policy. I really am proud that Europe is right now rising to the challenge. But as a person representing part of my generation, I also think it's time for Europe to start not only responding to challenges, but getting into a more active mode. And in specific, I want to ask, do you think that it's time, at least in the medium range, to talk, and not only talk, but act upon a European army? And what do you think should be the next specific steps into that direction? Thank you so much.
So we have the risk of escalation, differentiated integration, and maybe connect this with enlargement. Should Ukraine and others enter the same EU 27, Article 42.7, the already existing commitment to defending allies or kind of European allies, and another defense question?
Yeah, and then there was a question, I think, at the start on what Emmanuel Macron said. We did not call each other this morning to coordinate on what we were going to say, but it's good to hear that liberals have the same ideas. That's always reassuring to hear it. In the end, what it comes to is that the current process of enlargement is a very heavy administrative process. It takes time. It's a lot of reforms, and there is a reason for it. The reason is that over the past decades, we as Europeans have developed so much that if someone joins, we want to make sure that when they join, they are fully ready for it. But does that mean that during this process, you cannot do fun things together? And can I put it a bit in an easy way? I mean, it's like getting married. You don't have to wait for the wedding day before you can do fun things together. There's a lot of things, at least in liberal societies, there's a lot of things you can do. And then you get married at some point, or you don't get married at some point. Let's not choose on that. But what I want to say is that we Europeans have a very administrative approach to it. Check the boxes, and in the meantime, a lot of countries, and especially the case in the Western Balkans, a lot of countries are losing political capital because it's hard to do those reforms, and the population after 10 years says, okay, we've done all these things, now what do we get? And so I heard that at one of the European summits we had with the Western Balkans, is that sometimes it's important to be able for countries to be present. Be part of the discussion. Be part of, they're not part of the decision itself, but they're part of the discussion. And there's so many things that we can do. I mean, we can integrate them in the Erasmus program. We can integrate them in our mobile roaming systems. I mean, there's so many things that we can do together with population of countries which are not there yet. They're not married yet. And that, I think, is a reasoning that Emmanuel Macron also has. In the end, what we need to do today is to unite the European continent. And that means that we as a European Union need to play our role in our backyard. And for some countries it might be full membership at some point. But in that process there's so many things we can do. On your point on fearless and so on. Look, obviously I'm not careless, and that is different. Of course, we are aware of the tense situation in which we are, but there's different ways to look at it. Sometimes when you're faced with insecurities and with certain things which are more stable, the question is, what do you focus on? We always have a tendency to focus very much on the things we cannot control. I think that instead of losing energy in that, we should rather put our energy in the things that we can control. And this was what I mentioned in my speech, is let's focus on what we can do. Let's focus on making Europe better. Let's focus on delivering better to our population. Let's see how we can better work together. And yes, there is an uncertainty on how Russia might react. That is true. But honestly, sometimes you have to accept that certain things are a bit out of your control. This does not mean that you shouldn't be careful in how things are being done. But I mean, at some point, everything is seen as a provocation. So at some point, there's a bit of an inflation in provocations as well. And you might maybe just put less attention on it. Mr. Ambassador, indeed, there is a European obligation already to defend ourselves, and that already applies to Finland and to Sweden. But in the end, we have to find a way of better articulating what is NATO and what is European Union. And NATO, to me, is the cornerstone of our defense. And NATO has a very strong operational part. NATO is deciding who's putting defense forces on our eastern borders today, and they are doing the coordination of that, and that is their strength. And as a European Union, making ourselves stronger is not opposed to that. I think that actually it will make NATO function much, much better if we better pull our weight. But if we're forced to spend more, then I'd rather spend it in an intelligent way than just buying old stuff American and not developing anything here. So that element is there, but if Sweden and Finland integrate in NATO, it will be much clearer, of course. I mean, where is the chain of the command and who's taking the decisions?
How about Ukraine? We now talk about membership perspective for Ukraine. If there is this article to defend member states, aren't we, through the back door, facing the same problem that we are now trying to avoid with not taking in Ukraine and NATO? I mean, I think that was the core of the question.
Yeah, well, you would, if it starts tomorrow. And let's be honest, I mean, this is unfortunately, Ukraine is a part of their territory, is not under their control. In the checklist of the Commission, actually it's one of the questions. One of the questions is, are you under full control of your territory? Fortunately, it's not the case. I think towards Ukraine, we should not lose ourselves in a vocabulary debate. I mean, it's not about, do they get the status or the not status? I mean, much more important for Ukraine than a vocabulary discussion is how are we going to reconstruct the country. And there, we Europeans, we will play a crucial role. And as I said, reconstruction in a physical way and in a material way, in constructing democracy and building society and so on. Now, up to now, the sequence, I think, has always been first NATO and then EU. This is how it has happened after the fall of the Iron Curtain. But I mean, things can change. But Ukraine becoming full member part of the European Union, it is going to take time. And during that time, we should not tell to the Ukrainians, well, you're in the process. Please hold on because you're in the process. No, we have to do much more things which are much on the human side and less on the administrative side. On your remark on feminism, thank you very much. It's a topic that is close to my heart. And well, you were first with a female chancellor, but then we had a female prime minister as well with Sophie Wilmès, and I think it's important. Our government is a parity government. This was something which is important. Your question was on European army. Yes, we are slowly doing that, but it's small little steps. A European battle group and so on. I think that we'd rather have to look at some examples that exist, and I mentioned it in my speech. Belgium and Netherlands, we do this in a very integrated way. We protect our airspace, for example. We do it in an alternating way. For our Navy, we decided to develop together the battleships that we want, and we are fully integrated. So if we as countries can make this happen, then let's see how you can enlarge this. It's amazing how we're here in this public. If we would have had this event 2 years ago, if someone would have asked a question on defense, I think most of you would have said, defense, is this a topic to talk about? Today, half of the discussions are about defense. When I think about European defense integration, for me the first priority is define standards together, develop together, create our own industry together, buy the same things, practice together. Much, much more important than the fact that we will have a small common battle group. Doing it together, we often do it on the NATO level. The problem is that we are so dispersed. I think if I have the numbers in my head, European defense spending is approximately 200 billion, and the Russian one is 65 billion. And that's kind of surprising. Of course, Russia is much more aggressive than we are. But one of the issues we have is that we are so fragmented, is that it's extremely hard for us to do something together.
Thank you. Talking about feminism, I have now 3 male voices from the audience. So I would like to do at least two rounds now. And so 3 female voices who want to be next are kind of my first choice. But first, the gentleman over there with the yellow tie. And then the gentleman over here, and then the gentleman over there. Just to coordinate the microphones.
My name is Karl Grobet. I was born Belgian. I became German by exam, and I'm a European in heart. I work for the Liberals in the Deutsche Bundestag, and Parliament is something important. We had the conference on the future of Europe, which has been a bit forgotten because of the pandemic and the war. What do you think about strengthening the European Parliament, the proposals which are on the table now, which now have to go through the Council? That would be something I think we in Europe would give a good example if we could get further on by that.
Absolutely, and because the results of the conference were handed over today, maybe you can make some remarks on the general conference and what you expect now for the follow-up process, if there is any. The gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. I'm Wolf Klintz, a former member of the European Parliament. I have a question concerning the French presidential election. Marine Le Pen lost, but she has gotten, nonetheless, millions of votes based on a campaign that was largely anti-Europe and anti-German, Franco-German entente and collaboration. So what is the risk if there is one that you see concerning the future of our Franco-German Entente.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, the gentleman over there. Yeah. And as I said, ladies first for the next round, so make yourself visible. If there are no ladies, I take men.
All right, my name is Nathan Haydock, and I am with the Falling Walls Foundation with their Creative Bureaucracy Festival. And due to the very unfortunate events in Ukraine over the past month, I've seen an uptick in young professionals who are taking interest in public service and taking interest in this area and seeing how important it really is. And as I look around, I see a lot of young people in this room, and I see a lot of young people outside that are also getting interested. What is your advice for us and what is your advice for someone who's considering something in this field? Because I know a lot of people just don't know the pros and cons of it and just aren't convinced that public service is the right place for them. So what's your idea for them? What do you have to say? What's your advice for young people who are considering a career in this area?
And I missed your name?
It's Nathan Haydock.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Good. Now, first on the conference on the future of Europe and how to go forward. First, a Belgian perspective. Institutional reforms, we have quite a history with that. And my experience is that it leads to very long, very hefty discussions, long periods in which we are just looking at our own belly. And often, at least in Belgium, you end up with something where you say, well, was this actually the reason why we started this whole debate? Why I say this is that we have a tendency as politicians to believe that institutional structures drive policy or drive cooperation. What I've learned over the COVID period is that it's not just institutions, is that there is nothing that can break the power of people of good faith who want to do something together. And they do that despite institutions, very often. And actually the opposite as well. You can create all the structures you want. If you have a group of people in front of you who do not want to work together, you're never going to get anywhere. Now, I'm not saying this because I don't believe that Europe should become better, but I'm sometimes afraid of opening the big institutional debates, and then we all pump up our muscles, and it just leads to a very inward-looking discussion. Now, frankly speaking, we do need to strengthen our European democracy. Because the European democracy today, in my view, is a bit crippled. I mean, I know the generation of my parents would say, well, transnational election lists, this is never going to work. People in Germany don't know politicians in other countries. Maybe, but it can go very fast. And I do believe in the power of giving the European population the possibility to vote for people across countries. I mean, how much have we integrated over the past decades? I mean, how much closer have we actually come to each other? And this is a way of doing it. And myself, I'm part of the European Council, and I don't know, maybe I'm only one of the only ones, but I think that very often there is too much focus on the European Council. And I think that the focus should move much more towards the Commission and to the Parliament. And that might of course be a Belgian thinking, but I've seen all of my colleagues arrive in Brussels every so many weeks, and then they get in front of the microphone and they say, I'm here to defend my national interests. Whereas the Commission is supposed to defend the interests of all of us. And as a smaller member state, we're not I used to say we're a small member state, and then the Baltics came, and then we said, oh, we're actually not small, we're medium-sized. I believe that having more an executive power that drives the European agenda, with of course interaction of the European Council, but we have a tendency of having European councils that are very much driven by national agendas. And that, I think, is in times of crisis. I think over the last times we have been able to go beyond that. That's because we are confronted to such major challenges, and all of us understand that maybe we need to take a bit of a step back. Now, how to go forward with this conference? I think the question is, okay, can we make an agreement on the scope and how deep we want to go? And then what is the instrument we use? We'll see what the instrument is we use. That depends on how far we want to go. But what we need is mechanisms that reward politicians that want to work together. And we see this throughout Europe. We see an incredible polarization of politics through Europe. And we only come in the news when we attack someone else. Or when someone else attacks me, that's when we get into the news. When I prove that I can actually change my mind a bit because your idea is maybe not a bad idea and we find a consensus, yes, I know that's not very sexy. But that's how a society goes forward. A society goes forward by people who find solutions. And politics is so much driven by conflict. And that brings me to the question you asked. I think you've disappeared. There. Thank God that there are young people who are interested in joining public service or politics or public life or whatever you would call it. Because too often I see young people who are actually interested but who stay away from it because of the brutality they see and because of the way politics is being conducted these days. And that, I think, is quite dramatic, because as a society, if we are not able to at least attract part of the people who have the best motivation, who are the brightest thinkers, who are maybe the most convincing towards the public, I mean, how much are you losing as a society if you cannot do this? Now, practical things. First of all, there is no specific study to be a politician. In general, I would recommend not to study political studies, because having another experience is actually something, well, sorry, I hope I didn't insult anyone, but I think that having another experience is actually, this is for me one of the best things, is the fact that I've done 10 years something else. It gives me a broader perspective, and it makes me also less attached to it. I love what I do. I think it's an incredible honor that I'm allowed to do this. But the day that the public says it's over, it's time for someone else, no regrets. And I know that there is a life outside of politics, and if you want politics to function, you need politicians to be able to get out. And it's one of the issues we have, is that too often people stick too much to it. It's not a job. I don't think that being a politician is a job. It's a function, it's an honor that you can do it. Now, then the question is, what makes you tick? And that's a question you should have at some point in your life, is what motivates you? What gives you a good feeling? And I think for most people in public service, it's having impact. It's changing something. It's improving something. To me, it's a spirit that is actually very close to being an entrepreneur. Because being an entrepreneur is not so much about a bright idea. Being an entrepreneur is seeing this and saying, I can do this better. More beautiful, more convincing, cheaper.
This is a Naumann Foundation pen.
Exactly.
Be careful.
Exactly. It can be done better. I'll use another pen. But so the thing of how can we make things better? I think that's what drives most people in public service now. If you want inspiration, the Naumann Foundation is there for you, I think.
Now, quickly on the Le Pen scenario that was threatening all of us, and then I want to bring at least two women in, so it's a bit of an elevator pitch for you.
Okay, I got the message, shorter answers. I thought the Le Pen scenario is frightening, because we say, oh, Emmanuel Macron won, but still, I mean, large part of the population did vote for Marine Le Pen. Now, did they vote for her or did they vote against Emmanuel Macron? That's always the case in these type of winner-takes-all elections. That's why I think that actually a representative system like you have in Germany, like we have in Belgium, the Netherlands, has actually a lot of value as well. But we in Belgium also have extreme rights parties, which are actually quite big. It is kind of surprising. I mean, this is a candidate who had electoral publicity made with a picture of her and Vladimir Putin. And the 11 million of these needed to be destroyed. And still, part of the public is convinced of that. Now, why is that? We live in a complex society and very disturbing society. And then the question is, do you leave the floor open to people who say, it's easy, you just have to do that? Or do you challenge them? And do you call them out? And do you say, well, what you say, how do you actually want to do that? And confront them. And as I said, it's a daily exercise. I have no magic solution for that, but it's a quest, and that's what all people who believe in liberal democracy, we should be working on this every day.
More younger people working in favor of the EU could help as well, I would say. I have maybe only 2 female voices from the floor, one over there and one over there, and one over there. No.
The person at the front was first.
Book on feminism. So we take 3 female voices. I need you to be sharp and concise. So I heard that the lady in the front row was first. So you over there, and yeah, try to wrap it up in 20 seconds.
Yeah. Hello. I'm Nora Kurmitsi. I work for the Flemish government here at the embassy in Berlin. Thank you for speaking. It was very interesting. But now you see a lot of discourses about the liberal world versus the authoritarian world. But I question myself, do we, as a world community, or even a world community, still have to cooperate with Russia or even with China to tackle, for example, the climate crisis?
So cooperating with autocracies who think we are evil. The lady over there and the lady in the last row, I think, as far as I can see it. And then that's it. I see hands so that we could go on forever, but I promised to end more or less in time, and there is also Belgian beer waiting. I mean, there is hope.
The Belgian beer helps with questions. Sometimes with answers.
I will be asking not a very popular question, but addressing the elephant in the room, Turkey. I'm working for the Turkish Industry and Business Association, Berlin office, and I was wondering, because there is this policy of non-mentioning Turkey for some decades now, and using your analogy with marriage, the relationship is really complicated. But when you point out to 3 dimensions in your speech, defense, energy, and enlargement, I think it is hard to avoid to address the Turkey question soon. And I was wondering your opinion about that.
Thank you very much. And last question, the lady in the last row. Oh, hi. Second last row.
Hello, yeah. My name is Pauline. I'm a fellow Belgian, but I study here at university at the Institute for European Studies. And my question has a link to that. I'm here with a bunch of my classmates, and I'm sure they're going to be interested in the answer as well. We keep talking about the relevancy, or maybe lack thereof, of our field of study, Eastern European studies. Doesn't the fact that we missed our Agadir moment with the invasion of Crimea and the fact that this war started go to show that maybe the EU in general has had a lack of understanding of Eastern European developments, and shouldn't that be addressed if we want to integrate other Eastern European countries more meaningfully?
Thank you very much. That would explain why many people in Europe didn't see the war coming, especially in this country. So, dealing with autocracies, dealing with Turkey, understanding Eastern Europe better, that is it to wrap up for you. And then I apologize to everybody who could not take the floor. I tried my very best. Alexander.
So dealing with countries we don't like, because that's what it comes to. That's why you have a multilateral system, and that's why, I mean, when we make our climate agreements, we also talk with countries where we have deep differences. Just as we talk with countries where the rights of women are not respected, we have a conversation with them. So yes, this means that we will try through the UN system and others to get people moving into a certain direction. Now, the discussion on climate change is not just because we have to, it's also because everyone understands that it's actually in our own interest, also for countries like Russia or like China, to get moving. So it's not because we have different opinions that we should say, well, we have no contact whatsoever. But we should be a bit less naive, and I think that as Europeans we were a bit too much thinking that, you know,
change through
trade. And unfortunately, well, I didn't say that in my speech to blame anyone. I believed it as well. It seems that we were wrong. On Turkey, yeah, it's relationship status complicated is, I think, a good good description. Look, I'm in favor of having more clarity. But then there should be clarity on the side of the Turkish leaders as well. And then let's be open on where do we actually want to end. Turkey has been a long time NATO ally, and it's a good thing that they have been a NATO ally, and we've worked together so much, and they do play their role today around the Black Sea. On the European dimension, I think we have to say that we've stalled. I mean, the whole process kind of stopped, and then the question is, okay, where do we go? Do we want to pick this up knowing that it is a lengthy process, or do we say maybe it's part of this other type of relationship which we talked about, which means that we can have fun but maybe never get married? But we just have to at some point have an open and frank discussion on that, and I would definitely be in favor of that. On our knowledge of Eastern Europe, I so much agree with what you say. This is, for me, one of the things that frustrated me the most, is that too often in European discussions there was this feeling of a certain arrogance of the old European countries that were telling the new ones, you know, we've been here for such a long time, we'll tell you how it works. And that is so wrong. I mean, we're all members of the European Union to the same level. And yes, we might have different ideas, but that should not lead to a certain patronizing that I've seen too often. And too often I think we underestimate the fact that we come from different histories. Now, that does not mean that there should be a certain relativity towards fundamental concepts of the European Union. Definitely not. But a better understanding of how do we get there and how do we keep the momentum going for reforms and so on. I agree on that. And since you are studying, that'd be great. I mean, the moment you graduate, we are open for knowledge if you want to share it with us. Would like to thank you for a great debate. I have to say I really enjoyed it. Thank you for moderating this, and you are all invited at the Belgian embassy. It's really not far away. It's just the other side. Just follow the ambassador and we'll all meet you there. Thank you.
Thank you.